Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Halcyon PWT podcast. My name is Ronda Rousey. I'm going to be a host for this episode. It's been a while, a couple of weeks, if not a month, since I did my last podcast, and it sure as hell wasn't wrestling related. The main reason for that? I have been unsubscribed from the WWE network since 2 weeks prior to Crown Jewel, and if you don't know why, we'll probably end up getting to that at some point in this podcast, but it's undeniable. I still love my wrestling. I'm still a massive wrestling fan, so we got to talk some wrestling. So, on this podcast, let's kick things off by talking about the outcome from both Survivor Series, on Raw and SmackDown, and also talk about the NXT Takeover. Now, NXT Takeover, let's just get this out of the way to begin with. I have not seen it, but I have heard some of the results. I continue to believe that if NXT was rebranded and was its own show, I would be watching that as the superior product in American wrestling right now. The production values, the booking, the quality of the talent, and the sort of the frequency that they produce pay-per-views or pay-per-view quality events, it's the perfect model. It's just unfortunate that WWE has to serve too many masters for them to be able to use what is a winning formula and mainstream it, because by definition you can't. So it is what it is. I will get around to watching War Games. I'm 100% certain. A buddy of mine, we always tend to watch the NXTs because they're the best American wrestling shows that money can buy these days. But as far as it pertains to SmackDown and Raw, so from what I understand, Shane McMahon is still attempting to do the heel turn. And that's fine. He's been face since he came back. Nothing wrong with that inherently. The only issue I have with it is, as other people have alluded to, the booking is slightly inconsistent. Prior to going into Survivor Series, the idea being that if anyone loses, or if we lose any matches, I'm gonna fire some people, I'm gonna sack some people, and everyone retain their jobs. It's just, why say it? You know, don't say something that you can't back up or that you're gonna lose as a consequence. There has to be a consequence to what you see and do on television. And more WWE seem to be negating that. I mean, the big thing, SmackDown-wise, that has happened over the last few weeks is Daniel Bryan accruing the WWE Championship from AJ Styles, turning heel, doing so, but then going up against Brock Lesnar at Survivor Series, predominantly as a working babyface. Again, it's important to emphasize I've not seen any of the matches, but I know what the results were on the whole, and what the ramifications are as you know, in a wider context. And the fact that AJ Styles' run has been ended, and I don't yet understand the rationale between Daniel Bryan turning heel to face Lesnar in an admittedly good match by all reports, to coming back to SmackDown and continuing to be heel. It just doesn't really make any sense. If he's feuding with AJ, fair enough, they can produce great matches. But I see it as like SmackDown, because there have been some people there that could have feuded that should have had amazing programs. When AJ went up against Samoa Joe, I don't remember hearing massive things about it. I remember it having enough heat, and I remember it having a couple of decent matches, but as far as significant moments, not so much. The most significant moment I would argue that Samoa Joe has had so far was when he choked out Paul Heyman in his program with Brock Lesnar. It was just a great moment. It was NXT style booking. Like, I'm going to talk to you off the microphone. I'm going to talk to you in front of everyone here, but I'm going to be talking to you. I'm not addressing the people. I'm not addressing the camera. We're having a moment man to man. It was excellent. And it just seems like the WWE booking, it's so erratic at the moment. I mean, just to flip to Raw for a second, the whole Dean Ambrose heel turn. I get it, because Roman's on the shelf, so there's no need for the Shield at the moment, because, you know, you don't need Ambrose and Rollins to get Roman over if he's at home recovering from cancer, which is something else we'll talk about in a second. But at the same time, there needs to be... It's just too convenient. Do you know what I mean? The storylines just don't seem to be blossoming in an organic way these days. The only organic thing, and it's the one thing that everyone's raving about at the moment, is Becky Lynch. And she admittedly is embracing the persona of being a heel. She's on Twitter constantly spouting shit, throwing shade at people. And it's good, because clearly she's taking time to consider what her character is and what she should be saying, rather than just firing back some corny ass bullshit. And yeah, it'll run its course, but for the moment she is on top of the world as far as her character work and as far as her perception within the industry, and it's well deserved. If ever WWE was considering making a main event of WrestleMania a women's match, it's Becky versus Ronda, because unfortunately WWE are still WWE. They're paying her a fuck ton of money. Having that would be an amazing achievement for those two, and Becky Lynch in particular, because she would be the predominant reason for that event. Rousey would be the facilitator, as it were. The other thing I wanted to talk about, there's two things. Number one, whoever wrote there was a line, Baron Corbin and Braun Strowman, someone said something to the effect of decapitation or dismemberment is a company liability, or something along those lines. A thinly veiled nod or reference to the reason why they perhaps shouldn't have fucking gone to Saudi Arabia in the first place. Gee, topped only by the Dean Ambrose making reference to Roman Reigns getting what he deserved, or having to answer to the big man in reference to him having cancer. Now, WWE have never been the most tactful at the best of times, and even when they are tactful, it's typically because they smell some money. It's very rarely they do things as a meaningful tribute, and even then, it's usually very, very fleeting. The only times where it really makes sense is when they do tribute packages to wrestlers that have died, and even then, it's the ones that they have in their good books. Very seldom, if ever, do they do packages for wrestlers that aren't in their good books but have served them. Well, Chyna springs immediately to mind as a wrestler who gave the WWE the best years of her career, and yet she will never be in the Hall of Fame, and she will never be referenced. I bring her up a lot because it's interesting, the hypocrisy of WWE from time to time, considering that Hulk Hogan is now back in the fold, irrespective of his previous transgressions. But we're not talking about him for the moment, we're talking about the aftermath. So The biggest thing from the aftermath is the Rousey Becky Lynch issue, because that's the most intriguing element to come out. It's not Daniel Bryan. As amazing as it sounds, who would have said a couple of years ago Daniel Bryan is going to retire, but then he's going to come back, he's going to win the WWE Championship and turn heel. Imagine how amazing. And you can have AJ Styles and Samoa Joe, and you can have Brock Lesnar, you can have anyone you want to work with, realistically. And yet, the more intriguing storyline is with Becky Lynch, Charlotte, and Ronda Rousey. Because those three are intertwined at the moment, because Ronda Rousey's on Raw, Becky Lynch is on SmackDown. SmackDown has Becky Lynch and Charlotte feuding over the title right now. And while it's intriguing, the thing that's most intriguing at the moment is the groundswell of support for Becky, and the fans starting to turn on Ronda. And the reason why I think this is interesting is because of Roman Reigns' absence. In his absence, the fans need they need someone they can bitch at. They need someone they can hurl their ire at. Someone they can turn their attention to and hate on to the maximum of their ability. And that now is Ronda Rousey, which is something I've been saying all along. I don't like her gimmick. I don't like the fact that One of her moves now is now called the Piper's Pit. When someone, I can't remember who it was, it may have even been my best bud, said, oh, it's a tribute to Piper. Fine, you do a tribute, you do a reference to him in a match. You wear his shirt for a match. When you're stealing the gimmick, it's when you're doing the gimmick all the time. And she wears his shit. She wears t-shirts and things that are modelled after his shit. Her theme song isn't really even her own. And I've never liked Ronda Rousey as an individual. I didn't follow her MMA career until basically it ended. I think I really got into MMA properly as a fan right around the time that she lost to Amanda Nunes. So I've only seen Ronda on the back end when she's been doing interviews basically cussing out people for even insinuating she competed and lost at any point, and how could you say that, and blah blah blah. She's the most emotionally thin-skinned individual I've ever seen for someone that's purported to be the baddest woman on the planet. It's the reason why I antagonise people sometimes by saying, hey, if she's the baddest woman on the planet, stick a microphone in her face and tell her to tell you what it was like to lose to Amanda Nunes and Holly Holm. She'll scream at you, or she'll just fucking give you those dead eyes and walk off. No ifs, ands or buts. She can't stand up to that kind of criticism. She's very emotionally frail. Contrast this and all the protection she's been afforded, the springboard she's been given, and all the money she's being paid to be in the WWE with Becky Lynch. Someone whose gimmick was really, really underdeveloped for a very long time, and yet turning heel is, and the fans getting behind her, again, the comparison's been made a million times. It's an Austin-like moment. It really is. I can't stress enough how if they handle this right and they give this the respect and the push it deserves, considering that yes, Ronda's still green as shit, but Becky Lynch is seasoned enough. With Charlotte in the mix, they can use those three to weave a really interesting narrative between the two brands, but then also on pay-per-views and on social media and where else they can get the names out. That moment of Becky Lynch having been socked by Nia Jax will become a footnote in history as being one of the catalysts. Much the same way as Jake the Snake Robert was with Stone Cold Steve Austin, which is where the reference is going to come from. You all saw it coming. Her standing in amongst the crowd, her arms raised parallel to her shoulders, blood smeared all over her face, christening her face, as she just kind of shrugs and says, is that all you got? That nonchalant, almost non-caring attitude. That brash defiance. That look. She's always had an amazing look, but there was something about that moment where she became a legitimate superstar. A legitimate moneymaker, man. She has got it now. She has found her star as a wrestler, and it is so important WWE don't fuck this up, because they've been on the precipice of a couple of people for years. They had a character in Bray Wyatt who could have been a new massive superstar, and then they booked him on a losing streak, so now no one takes him seriously. They had physical superstars like Cesaro, who could do anything you wanted in the ring. Literally anything you wanted, he would be able to do. And he was, because he's Swiss, because he's foreign, we can't do anything with you. Brock Lesnar, they went to the well too many goddamn times, and now he's too old to build the company around. He's going to be going off into the sunset at some point. He doesn't love the business enough to stick around until after his best days are behind him, unless there's a pay packet involved, and once there's no pay packet, why is he going to want to come back, and why are the WWE going to even want to offer him it? They need to start protecting these stars. Rusev is the best example I can think of in recent times who they squandered because he wasn't in the plan. He had a guy who has a supreme physique, not a supreme physique, that's probably being too generous, but he's certainly imposing. He's got a mouthpiece in Lana who can be despised and loved, because what red-blooded male doesn't like Lana? But then at the same time, she puts on the Russian accent and gets all snooty to people. Yeah, I get it. But Rusev had the potential for a while to be a moneymaker with his Rusev Day shirts and the chant and his presence on social media, his relationship with Lana, to be a hero type character. But he's foreign and he's not part of the plan, and we're going to stick him with Aiden English and have him run a comedy angle and then have a feud between the two and blah blah blah, because we've got to have a feud between the two at some point. It has to happen. Tag teams can't just mutually break up. No, we've got to break up because there's heat. Fuck. Becky Lynch cannot be squandered. She is too... If you are serious... Look, here's the redemption I want to offer WWE after Saudi Arabia, because as of this moment, as of the recording of this podcast, and anyone is free to check this if you have the facility to do so, I am not subscribed to the WWE Network. I have not resubscribed, and at this moment, I have no intention of resubscribing. I get my news from the internet, I'll follow it when I can, but I ain't paying WWE to ignore the whims and the reason that the fans... almost universally everyone said, perhaps it's not the best idea you go. Maybe you reschedule it for London and you say to the Saudi Arabians, listen guys, I know we've got a 10-year contract with you, but you're going around murdering fucking American journalists, dismembering their bodies and lying about it when people knew you were lying about it. Maybe next year when things have died down, and maybe next year once you've perhaps decided gay rights are a thing and women's rights are a thing, and you see where I'm going with this? But no, you went straight ahead for what was effectively a nominal fee. $2 million extra in the pay packet, basically. All the wrestlers made good paydays, apparently. No one's released their figures, but they've all said they got paid really well, but who the fuck knows? That could just be a work. WWE saying, hey guys, listen, we need you to tell everyone how much money you're making. Don't give them figures, just tell them you got paid really, really well. Fuck, man. But here's... And obviously, the big one for me... Those are big ones, but this goes back to Greatest Royal Rumble. No women wrestlers on the event at all. And the one women's wrestling aspect of it, which was a commercial saying we're all better together, like, again, advocating like Saudi Arabia's a really progressive place. Look here, they released a presser after the fact and criticising it. Saying, oh yeah, well, the Saudi government don't condone this. We apologise profusely for the torrid nature of that commercial. I think it was predominantly oh gosh, it's not Camilla, is it? It's it's James Ellsworth's ex-partner, although we'll get to him in a minute as well. Fabuls. Oh god, I can't remember. Anyway, she was Carmella. There it is. The leotard she wears, the sort of singlet she wears thing, too revealing. Like, fuck, man. If you're gonna have WWE in Saudi Arabia, know the product, man. That's what they wear, and that's not even what you need to go back to WWE in the 1990s to see scantily clad, dressed women, man. That is actually reasonably respectable and functional as wrestling gear. Fuck, man. But coming back, the redemption. Having a women's only pay-per-view was not a concession for me. That was a bare minimum requirement. You kicked the women off the fucking pay-per-view that they couldn't earn a fucking payday from. And suppose if you are actually telling the truth and saying this was the best payday for wrestlers ever, okay, you cost them the biggest payday they could potentially earn outside of WrestleMania, you fuckwits. The redemption? Actually consider Becky, Charlotte, and Ronda in some capacity, somehow, some way for WrestleMania. Just consider it. Just think for 2 seconds about how you could book it, utilising the heat that Ronda's accruing, utilising the push and the fan wave of support for Becky, and the technical prowess and legitimacy that Charlotte could add to the situation. The heritage that she could add. You have a perfect mix there. You have a fucking dynamite program just waiting to be booked. Something that New Japan can't match, because they don't have the legacy that Charlotte Flair has in any of their competitors, unfortunately, as much as Kenny Omega and Cody Rhodes and all those guys. They don't have that, They don't have the mainstream coverage that Ronda Rousey brings, and they sure as hell don't have the widespread wrestling support that Becky Lynch does. Because Becky Lynch, at this point in time, this may change, and it hasn't always been the case, but I would argue that the smarks, the casuals, and everyone else in between likes Becky Lynch right now. You've got a perfect mixture. You can't afford to fuck this up. How would I book it? Fuck, man, I'm not a booker. I've never been a great wrestling booker. I don't understand the psychology. I can only just call things as I see them. But right now, if you were to ask me who would I book as the main event for WrestleMania, I'd book a three-way with those three men. It's excellent. Beyond making Tommaso Ciampa a main event in of itself somehow, some way, which doesn't happen because he's not on the brand and there's not enough time to call him up, get him in a program between now and Mania to make it work. I reckon Ciampa's probably going to debut the Raw after Mania this year. I just pray Velveteen Dream never gets called up because fuck knows what Vince is going to do when he ever gets his hands on him. But yeah, as far as the main event is concerned, it has to be, for me, at the moment, considering where you could go with it, considering the storylines, considering everything that goes into it, it's a no-brainer. So, let's also talk about Brock Lesnar for a second, because his UFC situation is interesting. Because he's still not yet been actually announced for a fight in January, in February, when his suspension is up. Even though he got into the ring and had that little tussle with Daniel Cormier, because Cormier has since fought Derek Lewis, beat him in the first round, I believe. I'm pretty sure he beat him in the first round, rear naked choke, 2 minutes in, if memory serves. But no plans announced there. No plans announced for not even a tune-up fight for Lesnar to come back into the UFC, come back into the USADA testing pool, fight, and then perhaps have a match for the... Because I think, from a personal perspective, you can't have Brock Lesnar come into the UFC and fight for a world title fresh off of suspension. You can't do it. He's not ranked. He was suspended because he was guilty of doping, and he had a 4-month clean slate prior to that to, if he was on any juice, to get off it in time for the testing to start. And he still tested fucking hot. So you have to consider that when booking him. But the crowd, the fans of the crowd seem to think he should get a shot against DC. The idea being that DC calls the shots right now, and DC deserves that payday. Fine, I understand that to a certain degree, but for the UFC to take itself credibly, they can't put him in there with Daniel Cormier, his first fight back. You can't afford to do it. You've got to stick him in there with someone else. Stick him in there with Derek Lewis. Stick him in there with Ngannou. That would be a great fight. Brock Lesnar's wrestling background versus Ngannou's power. Ngannou is fresh off of a TKO victory over Curtis Blades, I think his name is. But really, really, really deceptive left hand that put him down as well. Blades just never really recovered. It wasn't the most clinical of knockouts, and it was very tepid in the lead up to that. No one really launching any attacks, a lot of overhands missing. But he got the job done with that left hand because he hit so fucking hard. The thing with the Brock Lesnar situation, though, is that as far as WWE is concerned, he is still Universal Champion. He's still the head of Raw, basically. He's the guy that's carrying that brand right now when Roman Reigns is absent, because they're still not ready to pull the trigger on Braun Strowman, and now he's re-injured his shoulder. Who else can carry the belt? Well, there's no one feuding with Lesnar at the moment beyond Strowman. The Ambrose Seth Rollins feud is probably going to be for the IC title, and that's if they keep the title in the fold. They might drop it to make to build another set of matches for Mania for the IC title on the undercard or in the earlier part of the event, to leave Ambrose and Rollins on its own for a grudge match or for a cage match or whatever the case may be. But it's tricky to see where Lesnar fits into the fray now, because who can you book him against? Who are you bringing back to face this year? Goldberg's sure as fuck not coming back. Who else is there? So it's a very complex situation right now, considering that his path to the UFC is still far from clear. It would have been interesting, perhaps, to have John Jones fight Brock Lesnar, I guess. Two doping guys. Jones making his debut at heavyweight to maybe face Daniel Cormier down the line. Who knows? It's a tricky one, but I think it'd be interesting to see where Brock Lesnar fits into either side, because one way or the other, the chips are going to fall one way or the other. Does he fully commit back to WWE? Does he fully commit to the UFC's training camp for one last big payday, or for a couple of last big paydays in the UFC before signing off for good? Because he is the wrong side of 40 years old now, so not very good. Final couple of points on this particular edition of the podcast. Hogan, I made reference to him earlier. At Crown Jewel he made his big return, because why the fuck not? He's in the midst of the most scrutinized WWE event perhaps in recent history, in terms of saying he really should. Beyond having a Chris Benoit Memorial Night, I'm not sure how many other events could be done that would raise the ire of so many people, casuals or otherwise. I really genuinely think it's a mistake to have him back. Who stands to gain beyond Hogan? Really, when you think about it, there are fans that think they want him back. In fact, Kenny McIntosh, who runs Inside the Ropes, I had a tiny back and forth with on Twitter. I think it was 2 or 3 messages, basically saying, how can you really forgive and forget? The idea being that everyone deserves some kind of redemption. This is a 55 to 60 year old man. Do you really think that anyone that comes out with that kind of rhetoric at that kind of age is changing his opinion on a motherfucking thing at this point? You think sending him to sensitivity classes and training or anything like that is going to stop him from saying those things and thinking those things and behind the scenes working those things? Come on now. And to have him back in the fold, and to have him say, well, he went back into the locker room and he talked to the guys, and Velveteen Dream has taken his gimmick twice now as sort of a compensation in passing back to the younger talent. I'm sorry, I just don't buy it. And the fact is that he takes away from the product more than he gives right now, because his reputation is done. It's over. His name will now be as synonymous with that event as he was with 1980s wrestling. It really was that bad. And when you look into his history in more detail, and you see how badly he fucked over TNA, the whole debacle with his son, having gotten into a car crash with a kid that was rendered paraplegic and I think later died, and the way he tried to cover up that situation, and the phone calls that were leaked about him trying to get preferential treatment for his son in prison. Fuck, man, you can't have this guy in the fold anymore. But WWE seem hell-bent on having him back in, because otherwise they can't play all the packages that have his fucking face all over them, because of course the 1980s was Hollywood Hogan, and all of these different scenarios and events that culminate with a match with Hogan in the 80s and all the nostalgia that comes with it, which is what in a large part the network was based on, which is what originally, this is what we'll talk about in a second, what was originally the business plan for WWE going forward, to make money off the network using nostalgia, not necessarily focusing on the here and now. It's a bad move. I understand the logic, but I think you're looking at it from a narrower perspective. Especially when you consider, and this is the final point of the podcast, how adversely the SmackDown deal with Fox is going to affect the product going forward, because now it's going to be oxy-fucking-moronic. Fox are going to be paying them an obscene amount of money to be on Fox, just for SmackDown, I might add. UFC are not going to get as much money. And think about that for a second. It's because, obviously, WWE have a built-in audience of 3 million plus a week. It varies between 2.5 and 3.3, I think, sometimes. It can dip down as low as 2.2 from what I've read, although those figures they kind of come out of nowhere. I don't really understand them beyond how many households, and they have to make multiplications based on that. Plus, figures aren't that relevant anymore because people don't they watch it on demand, or they watch clips on YouTube, and blah 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 blah. But the point is that WWE are now going to be financed predominantly by these kinds of deals, which means that the week-to-week booking becomes more and more important, because they need to make sure those figures stay high. As irrelevant as pay-per-views were, and main events were, and these special events were, with the exception of the Big Four, Royal Rumble, Survivor Series, WrestleMania, and, oh gosh, Forgetting one now. Forgetting one. This is bad. This is bad wrestling. Bad wrestling fan. But those were really the only ones that mattered in the eyes of the casual wrestling fan. For the hardcore, you know, we look forward to them. I still think having like Hell in a Cell as a pay-per-view is a fucking stupid idea, and Great Balls of Fire is one of the worst names for a pay-per-view I've ever heard. All in all, you look forward to those events because they're special. Now, what incentive is there to have the payoff of your storylines at those events? They don't make you any more money. They probably have fewer eyeballs on them week to week or event to event because only the hardcores are tuning into them. They're all on the network anyway. Which, how do you do? Because now the scrutiny is on the booking week to week, but that means 2 hours to 3 hours of high quality booking every single week. That's not possible. There's no one could write an Oscar-worthy film every week. It's not possible. And times that by 30 wrestlers on each show. You've got to write an Oscar-worthy novel for each of those guys once a week, and then also 205 Live and NXT on top of that. It's a slippery slope WWE on. They've got the money now to be able to invest in their products, and I understand that, but I don't understand how going forward they can maintain the quality. As much as people rag on it at the moment, WWE does produce some good shit from time to time. Now, though, the pressure's on to do it every single week because that's where the bulk of their money is going to be coming from, not the network. Which also means the network. Are all the incentives for that going to go? Does that mean that the previous... Is it going to be tiered? Is it going to be similar to the Sky package? Do you only get WCW, AWA, ECW as packages now? For an extra $1.99, you get this and this and this. Do you get locked off after certain periods of time? Can you only buy the 90s? I see that day coming now, where it's not a flat rate for the network. Netflix and other streaming services are going to start looking into that as well, because they realise that offering people this wide array of content for the flat rate is a thing of the past. It's coming to a head these days, where you're going to look at it from the perspective of, well, people are prepared to pay more, so we're going to charge them more. WWE are not going to be far behind that curve if they can see a way to make money on top of the Fox deal. So what I want to hear from people on this podcast is, where do you think the future of professional wrestling in America goes from here? Because we've all come to rue the day that Raw went to 2 hours. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that SmackDown could go to 3 hours as well, and everyone has said how exponentially harder it is to write that third hour of television every single week. It just means that there's just too much to cover. And are WWE starting now to serve too many masters with the live audience, with the wrestlers, with the television audience, with the online audience, with the pay-per-view audience? There's a lot that's going into that, and I'm concerned about the future of it, because as much as I'm not subscribed right now, I'd like to think that I would subscribe in the future, because I do love wrestling, and WWE is still the premier attraction when it comes to wrestling. New Japan is still ways behind. They produce great matches, but I can't get too invested because there is that language barrier, and the booking is slightly different, and the culture is slightly different. And I've grown up with WWE. It's an acquired taste. You get used to it. And I'd like to think that WWE can turn the corner, but there's a lot going on right now. So what do you guys think? What do you think about the future of WWE? What do you think about the future of professional wrestling? What do you think about in terms of the incentives there is to produce good pay-per-view quality matches, or the emphasis on television matches rather than the network? What do you guys think? Leave your thoughts in the comments in the comments and the description below. In the meantime, though, thank you very much for listening to this edition of the Halcyon PWT podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe. You'll be also getting podcasts this week on sporting events, general, and also on the channel. So you'll be getting another couple of podcasts in the next couple of days. So please keep your ears to the ground for those. You'll also be getting content every single week from now until at least March next year. You'll be happy to hear, with new podcasts and new shows rendering every single week. So I'm hoping to make it one show a week at least for the next 4 or 5 months, and we'll see how things go from there. Also, as I've harped on about a million times, go check me out on Defunct Games channel. I've done a couple of videos with him, and he's also producing some excellent content. GFY Productions, go check him out. Crow, everybody else in the description below. Nutty Ninja, a few of the people I'm forgetting the names, Bash Brothers, go and check them out as well. They're producing great content. But in the meantime, thank you very much for listening. Please like, share and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, and as always, take care of yourselves, and thank you very much for listening to this edition of the Halcyon PWT podcast.